So, hi. Back here with Alex and Thomas. Today, the second part of our connection video. Today, it's about Google Analytics, raw data in BigQuery. So, with the new GA4, or as Google said, new GA, there are also some changes in terms of getting raw data and getting the data in BigQuery. This is what we will basically talk about today. How to basically set up the exports, how basically the data is structured, what kind of changes we have from GA4 to Universal Analytics, and also some other interesting parts. So have fun, stay tuned. Next point, GA4. I think about Universal Analytics, we don't need to talk anymore. Of course, Universal Analytics is still in use in a lot of companies. You get the raw data with UA360, so the old Google Analytics 360. You can basically set up raw data transfer to BigQuery. But it's limited till next year anyway. So whoever hears that for the first time, check the dates. Middle of next year for free users. End of September next year for paid 360 users. Also check your contracts, because as far as I know, there's also a limit when you can basically renew the contract. I think as of beginning of the year, you cannot renew your contract anymore for 360, but not 100% sure here. It's what I heard. But way more important is GA4. So what can we say about raw data access of GA4?
So there's a quite cool integration from Google Analytics 4 to BigQuery. So you can set it up in Google Analytics, in your Google Analytics property you want.
In the property, right?
Yes.
Yes. Which makes sense, because the property is exactly the place where the data is stored.
Exactly. So and one of the big advantages of Google Analytics 4 is now that you have a free limit of data you can bring to BigQuery. So that is quite cool, and the limit is 1 million hits per day, so 1 million events per day, whatever. So it's because everything in Big GA4 is very event driven. Yes, so that's the first point. Yeah, and also one thing which was always a little bit frustrating for us in European Union countries, or in other countries which are not part of USA, that you have to do some randoms or some more work when you want to add your data to a EU dataset in Universal Analytics. So then you have to, so in Universal Analytics, it was the case that you always at first create a dataset in the EU, then call it whatever you want, and then in Universal Analytics you have then to set it to this dataset in BigQuery, and it also has the correct naming and so on.
Here we have to say the issue again was Universal Analytics basically auto-created the dataset. Yeah. This dataset was auto-created in US, but normally your BI product infrastructure was in the EU. So the workaround
in the EU.
or whatever data center, whatever location you had your data inside.
Yeah.
But of course, obviously you need your Google Analytics data also in the same location. So what you could do is take this string, which is auto-created by Google, which is the property ID.
Yes.
What's the property ID? Is still the property ID?
Events _ property ID, I think.
And before it was just the property ID, correct?
Yeah.
And create that dataset inside your location. And then Google thinks, okay, this dataset is already there. I don't need to auto-create it, but it was in a different location, which was not a problem. So this worked. And now it's different.
Yeah. So now you can easily set in your Google Analytics integration to BigQuery one of the points you have to set up is to set your location for the dataset, which is quite cool. And there you have the normal multi-regional stuff and also regional regions. Yes, so that is quite easy. Then you get when you are not 360 customer, you get then the warning that you can just export 1 million hits per day. And if you are over these, so if you have more than 1 million events per day in your property, you can still set it. Especially you can exclude events. So for example, if you have some events, especially maybe from Google Analytics already, scroll events or user engagement events, whatever, which are maybe not so important, but they are also quite a lot of, so they are happen a lot of times there, and you have a lot of event counts there, then you can exclude them, which is also quite good. And then you also get a good overview how many events in average you should export in the next days, or based on the historical data.
Yeah.
So that's
What
quite
happens if I select all of them, right? All, let's say, how's it called? Event types, I think.
good.
If I select all of those event types, it's more than 1 million per day. I have the free version. What's happening?
As far as I know, you get then just the first, so it's stopping then after 1 million,
Okay.
as far as I know.
Okay.
We
So-
can quickly check it, but I think as far as I heard, it's like that.
So check that, watch that you don't get basically inaccurate data,
Yeah.
because it's get cut, you basically have an eye on that. So of course 360 is still available to buy. The pricing is a bit different than it was with Universal Analytics. For some, it's getting a little bit cheaper. For some, it's getting a little more pricey. If you need more or higher limit for exporting the data, or more, let's say, custom dimensions and so on, it might make sense. What I usually say is Universal Analytics was not that cheap in the 360 version, but I think you need to compare it to your basically marketing spend you have. And if this is basically getting to a certain limit, let's say 500,000, 1 million per month, which we see very often, then maybe the 100K it was before for Universal Analytics, or 130K per year in that case is not the biggest problem for you to have exact data and correct data. But of course it's up to you. Those are the limits at the moment, and basically the selection of the events, like event types, is super nice, because normally you are maybe in your raw data information not interested in scroll events, which are happening quite often, and you can easily exclude them. What about the data structure? So in Universal Analytics, everything was structured as basically page views, and inside those page views you had a lot of like nested objects, which basically gave you hits and custom dimensions and a lot of other stuff, like products, for example, for the product. How was it called? Scope before.
Yeah.
How is it now, Alex? How do we see data now in GA4?
So, as also for GA4 generally, it's also really event driven. So one line, one row in the export in the raw data is one event. So you have something like event timestamp, event name for sure. And then you have also some nested fields. So for example, you have event parameters. So we will also talk it, I think, again in the GA4 part, when we talk a little bit about differences, Universal Analytics GA4. We will also talk about that, but just quickly as a reminder, you can set, I think 20, at least for the free version of GA4, you can set for every event, if you want, 20 event parameters to event. So for example, if you have page views, then you can send something like a page view type or page type to it. I don't know, if you are in a newspaper, you can set then categories for the news and so on. So in these parameters you get then also in an array or in a struct field. And then you can access them. So you give them it's a key value pair, so you can access the key and also get the value out of that. And some things are also there. So for example, the session IDs inside, is it an engaged session or not, and a lot of other stuff which are already there. So you have already at the default, you have 5-6 parameters, I think, for most of the events. Then you have for sure the user pseudo ID, that is important. It's called user pseudo ID, and you also have the user ID. The user ID you can set on your own. So if you have, for example, in the background some kind of a user ID, and you can always push it to GA4, then you can put it in this user ID. Else, user pseudo ID, I don't know if it's the best fitting name, but that's then the normal user ID which is generated by Google. Yes. Yeah, so and then you have some other stuff. So for example, you have then line items, I think it's called, or just items, not completely sure. So for example, if you are on a view item event, or if you have a purchase, and you structure your data in the correct way for GA4, then you also get then in this line item or item object, you get then the all of the item.
I think also we can really make an like a separate video for that, where we basically also explain the structuring the data layer. So what do we need? I think there are also a lot of like good videos in YouTube already, how to basically feed the data layer to get basically this enhanced e-commerce data, that you then also see your line items in your category view or in your product list view, whatever.
And Vesh and Zanu already also wrote blog posts in our Dataset medium about it. So to get some insights in your and starting point for analyzing your GA4
So
data.
meet Vesh and Zanu in our blog post session on the website and on Medium. And if you have questions about GA4, I think also Alex will do a nice blog post somewhere in the future about tracking. That will follow. Maybe last thing to say.
I think we quickly have to talk about the dataset structure or the table structure again, intraday and normal table.
Yeah, that's. What would you say there?
So if you are not familiar with Universal because it's quite the same. So you always have in your dataset, which is called, I'm not sure, events underscore, then the property ID, or analytics underscore the property ID, I'm not completely sure, but whatever, you will immediately see it in your BigQuery dataset. And when you open it, you have two tables. You have your events intraday underscore, and then 1, 2, 3, whatever. And then you have your events underscore, and then a lot of, and then also a number in brackets. The events intraday table is in best case, just data of today. So it always, especially when you're streaming your data, you can also select there are two different possibilities in your GA4 export. But when you something like stream your data to your BigQuery dataset, then this intraday table gets refreshed every minute. I don't know how often it's getting refreshed.
What's the downside? Do you know that? Because in Universal Analytics, it was always like, for example, this user ID was not available.
As far as I know, it's still that.
As obviously Google needed to basically create that user ID over multiple devices and so on. This takes some time. This takes some processing time, like calculation time.
Yeah.
And that's why streaming was obviously not possible with the user ID. I'm not quite sure if it's the same with GA4 at the moment.
So as I said, I'm also not completely sure. I also don't use this intraday thing so often. Mostly I use the normal events table. But yes, so there you get the data, and then somewhere in the morning, I think for GA4, as far as I know, it's still this kind of range they set for putting the events intraday to event table.
I think this range is really like ridiculous to say it like that.
Yeah.
Because they say it's, I think the SLA Google gives you is, for the free version, 72 hours, I think, for filling the table, which is of course, I don't know. But even for 360 users, it was, I think, 24 hours. So it was quite long, I want to say.
So most of the time or the days, somewhere in the morning or before, whatever, then your data from your events intraday table gets deleted, and all of the data gets then pushed to the events table, and then it should be clean. Yes,
Sometimes there are multiple tables. I want to say that. Continue.
So sometimes the events intraday table gets not deleted due to any problems. I don't know. And we also, but that we're also checking now. We also get now the feeling that always the day of before yesterday, the day gets also not deleted. But maybe it's also a new thing. Yeah, let's see. But yes, so sometimes it's happened that it's not deleting.
So if you see multiple intraday tables, it's not a problem at the end.
Yeah.
It's normal, but your data was definitely transferred. So you don't need to worry about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think that's an important point. Also, one thing for Google Analytics 4 is get the historical data. That is not really possible. So always when you are starting, at least for the free version, I'm not sure how it is for the 360 users, but at least for the free version, when you're starting today to transfer your data from GA4 to BigQuery, you get the data from today. I think for Universal.Dix, you got the data also from some days ago.
14 months back.
Okay.
14 months was, and there was a limit. I think 1 billion lines or 14 months. Was something like that. We are currently checking that. If there's a look back window for GA4, when you say okay for free users it's not there, we will check that for 360 and also give you this information when we cut the video. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it doesn't make sense to go more into the structure because I think we need to also give some screen casts for that. And explain a little bit more data layer and also tracking beforehand. But yeah, so the biggest change, to say that again, for GA4 versus Universal Analytics is the structure of the data. We don't have basically one line for page views and then everything is nested inside this one line. But we have basically multiple rows for multiple things which are happening on your website. That you have a little bit better idea what I mean. If you, for example, were going on a product detail page beforehand, then you had a page view for that particular product, and then you click on Add to Cart. This Add to Cart was an event, and this event was basically as a hit, nested and structured inside that row. So you need to break basically that row, and you need to unnest everything to get this basically add to cart event. And now it's completely different because add to cart is a single event, which is a single row. The page view is a single row. A scroll event is a single row. So it makes everything way easier in terms of handling, in terms of filtering.
The structure of GA4 data is way easier than, I would say, as for Universal.Dix. You still have sometimes the problem, or you have to be careful that you don't duplicate any data. So it was also the same for Universal.Dix. If you unnest rows and so on, you also have to be careful still in GA4 if you want to unnest your parameters, for example, your event parameters. But yeah, it's way more intuitive than the Universal.Dix data. Yes?
Good.
Then should we spreadsheet in the next video?
Yeah.
Okay, then I find not a bridge like Ricardo.
If I can do it today, I can do it. If someone would like to have more information about analytics topics, about GA4, about GTM, about BigQuery and Data Studio, where can this person go, Alex?
Yes, so as I said, we are already published some blog posts in Medium about that topic. Else for sure, checking the other YouTube videos, we already talked about BigQuery, some things, also 1 or 2 topics about GA4 and tracking and so on. And we will also cover some more topics in the future. Yes, then check out LinkedIn, still team posts. We also had a cool team event in the last days where we're pushing some stuff. Yes, and the new newsletter every Friday where we push some interesting analytics from the world to our newsletter, to you. Yes, and then check out the next YouTube videos and then see you.
Follow us and see you in the next video. Bye bye.